Who are the top 12 Dynasty wide receivers? We're talking about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is former NFL scout Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, how's it going today?
Things are good. Things are real good. How about you?
Yeah, things are good here as well. Midweek, we're in that transition period, moving towards week 11, ready for another big week of NFL action. Matt, last week here, we were talking about the top 12 Dynasty quarterbacks and running backs based on new November Dynasty ADP from DynastyLeagueFootball.com. We always try to give that sneak peek to the DLF ADP. It's not a sneak peek any longer because it has now been posted. So if you are a DLF subscriber, go check that out. We're going to talk about the top 12 pass catchers today, both top 12 wide receivers and the top 12 tight ends. So let's get right to it, Matt.
I love it. Let's go.
The wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 2, we'll knock them out here at the same time. They're also the top 2 overall players in our ADP, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, just as they have been for months now.
Yeah.
I don't think, even with the injury to Justin Jefferson, I don't think there was any concern that he would fall out of that wide receiver 1 spot or the 101 spot. Even when there were some reports or possibilities that he would even miss the rest of the season, he was still being valued as the wide receiver 1, and that is where he is now. And same thing for Jamar Chase. Started out the season slowly, didn't really impact his dynasty value. I didn't see a buy low opportunity for either of those guys over the past few weeks. It looks like Jefferson will be back on the field, hopefully as early as this coming week. So good news for Jefferson and Chase, both at the top 2 spots.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the slightest bit worried because they're both tremendous players, but that back thing that Chase is dealing with, I think, is a small short-term concern. And
Yeah.
I also think Jefferson, we talked about Josh Dobbs a little yesterday. Like, I don't know that he's the ideal quarterback, and we don't know who the Vikings quarterback's going to be next year, but these are small potatoes,
Well, it's been a few weeks ago, and maybe it was when Jefferson first suffered that injury, or it might have even been our October ADP review that we mentioned. We suggested basically the thing that's keeping these guys at the top 2 lines is there's really not anybody challenging them. Well,
I think that's different now. Yeah,
maybe we spoke that into existence because we've got a couple of guys certainly if not challenging Jefferson and Chase, at least potentially joining them in that top tier. And of course, we're talking about the wide receiver 3, AJ Brown, the wide receiver 4, CeeDee Lamb. Both of those guys, especially Lamb, on just a crazy tear over the past few weeks. I think Lamb, I believe the stat was he now has 10 plus catches and 150 plus yards in 3 straight games. First player to ever do that in NFL history. AJ Brown has or I should say had, I believe that streak got stopped, but he had a 7-game streak of 125 plus yards. Again, super impressive and very, but both of these guys have been very productive this season. Are you putting either of these, AJ Brown or CeeDee Lamb, into that top tier with Jefferson and Chase right now.
No, but they stand alone in their own tier to me. I mean, they're phenomenal. They're on fire, as you said. People might think Lamb is hotter than Brown. I don't know who is at the moment, but you mentioned, I mean, Brown had that crazy streak. Then it got broke. Then they were on a bye. So it wasn't like he exactly is cool all of a sudden. He just had one game in the last 2 weeks where he didn't have 125 yards. So these two are on fire. They are in good situations. They're in good offenses. I think they're firmly 3 and 4. And then you start talking about who's 5.
Yeah, I think Brown sometimes, and I've been guilty of this myself, gets knocked a little bit because he's a couple years older than a lot of the other wide receivers in this top tier, including Jefferson and Chase, including some of the other names that we'll mention here coming up. But he's still young, right? I mean, still, I believe 26 years old. So this is not a guy that we're worried about or we're trying to sell before he gets too old or anything like that. These are still all very young players that are going to be around for years to come, honestly. So AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, 2 awesome dynasty assets. And like I said, I've been guilty of it myself. I had to move both of these guys back up my rankings recently and kind of, almost apologize for doubting them at points earlier this year.
Yeah, I'm high on both. I mean, I think the conversation starts to get interesting now. I mean, those are the top
I agree.
4.
I agree. And this is something we've talked about and many have talked about, just the way to value the younger receivers versus the productive veteran wide receivers. And there were 4 guys that have been in that group as around that 30-year old mark. And we're talking, of course, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, and Cooper Kupp. Adams and Kupp have both fallen off a little bit, at least in value. Of course, Kupp's been injured to start the season. Devontae Adams has had some struggles. Hopefully he starts to bounce back soon. But Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs have not struggled for the most part this year. Tyreek certainly has not, and he is the wide receiver 5. And again, it's just the question of how do we value those guys versus younger wide receivers that might not be as productive. So are you willing to move off of Tyreek Hill to take a guy like Chris Olave, to take a guy like Devontae Smith, who have had, honestly, their share of disappointing games this season?
I want to throw one thing out there because I think if you're a contender and looking to buy a veteran, Kupp and Adams are great, quote, buy low targets. They're not going to, you can't get them for a second-round pick or anything like that. But I think the second half of their season could be monstrous for both those guys.
Totally agree.
What's interesting to me is some of these young guys' stock is down, that have been higher. If they were a stock next to their ranking, their stock has gone down a little. Garrett Wilson, Waddle, Olave, who you mentioned, Devontae Smith. They have not taken a step forward fantasy-wise. You can blame Aaron Rodgers. You can blame some injuries. The Saints situation's weird. But I still think I really want to invest in that crew. I just think they're all really good football players.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we'll list the order here of several of those guys coming up. I'm not giving up on any of those players, despite, some up and down seasons. And, you could even say some disappointing first half of the seasons for some of those guys. Is it as simple as if you've got that strong title contender, you're just keeping Tyreek Hill and rolling with it? Or even in that situation, are you willing to pivot off of him for one of these others?
It'd be hard to give up right now if I'm trying to I mean, he's a force of nature. Yeah. I mean, in fact,
Tyreek Hill,
week to week, how much there's any receiver I'd rather start.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just
Tyreek Hill is the wide receiver 5. Wide receiver 6. We'll sneak one more in there and finish off the top half of the wide receiver 1 group. It's Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, another young guy, just 24 years old, same age as CeeDee Lamb. And I mean, just consistent, safe, productive, and again, young. Like, we love the offense. It's hard to find any holes in his game. I mean, maybe that comes at the, maybe that comes in the form of limited upside compared to some of these other guys. I mean, we've seen AJ Brown and Lamb and these guys put up multiple touchdowns and 150, 180 yards. Amon-Ra's probably not doing that, but he's going to see a dozen targets every week. And especially if you're in a PPR league, that is so valuable.
So real quick on St. Brown, if it was a startup draft, I would take him over Hill. He would be my fifth guy here. It's a different conversation how you laid that before. If you're a contender, I don't know if I'm trading Hill for anybody, just I just want to win. But I found it interesting, and I agree with everything you said about St. Brown. But when they played the Chargers this past week, and him and Keenan Allen were either going up against one another, I'm like,
right,
that's going to be his career. Like if I get Keenan Allen in his second or third year and start him 15 times a year for the next 10 years, you're pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean? Absolutely. Absolutely. Amon-Ra remains really my favorite wide receiver in the game. He's a little bit cheaper, and in some cases quite a bit cheaper than the names that we've already mentioned. He's the one that I just want on every roster I have. Doesn't have the same upside as some of the others, but again, so safe and reliable. And I still think even at wide receiver 6, a little undervalued.
Maybe. Yeah, he'd be my clear 5.
Those are the top 6 dynasty wide receivers. We will continue the list and continue the conversation right after this.
So these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. I wish I had such a process for when I was in the scouting world. I mean, this would have been a great thing. So that's why you check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. So simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires and versus leading competitors. It's the only way to go, really. So LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. That's a key. We don't always have time for such things. So you want to be faster and more efficient. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Folks, I also want you to score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So think about that for a minute. If you would have bet on the Cowboys money line against an awful Giants team, all you needed was the Cowboys to win, your $5 turns into $150. I mean, that's hard to pass up. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is extremely easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, over-unders, player props, spreads, money lines, of course, as we just talked about. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sport Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Matt, let's keep the wide receiver conversation going. Again, we're looking at the top 12 dynasty wide receivers based on the November ADP from dynastyleaguefootball.com. We update that every single month. Wide receiver 1, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are the top 6 so far. Wide receiver 7, Garrett Wilson. And again, we threw out some of these names earlier, the younger wide receivers that have been up and down, inconsistent, disappointing this season. Garrett Wilson is a guy who was being drafted even as a first rounder in some redraft leagues. And of course, the expectations were very different when we thought Aaron Rodgers would be throwing him the ball versus Zach Wilson. So we understand the reason for the disappointing production, but it still kind of feels like a wasted year for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, it does. I will say the Jets are pretty darn good at getting the ball his direction. It's just the guy that has to do it, and the protection is a problem. I'm still a fan with wide receivers like these young guys. I'm just betting on pure talent, and there's a couple on this list that have lots of it.
Yeah, Garrett Wilson, again, young, just 23 years old. We're not worried about him long-term. Wide receiver 8, Jalen Waddle, a little banged up this year, dealt with a couple of minor injuries. And again, we talked about Tyreek Hill. The gap in production has widened this year. You really looked at those guys as 1A and 1B last season. I don't know if that's the case anymore. It's clearly Tyreek Hill's show right now in Miami.
Yeah, sort of like the Eagles and a couple of these teams where there was 2 big dogs. The bigger dog is eating this year more than the Batman Robin situation. So again, not super worried about him.
Wide receiver 9, back to the old guys, quote unquote. Stephon Diggs, 29 years old, is the wide receiver 9. And I want to ask you kind of the same question. Where do you value him compared to some of these young guys we're looking at here? Is this about right?
About right. Chris Olave is next on the list. And I would go Wilson, Waddle, Olave, probably in that order before I would even consider Diggs.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I agree.
Diggs versus Devonta Smith is where I start to have a hard conversation with myself.
Okay. Stephon Diggs, the wide receiver 9. You mentioned Chris Olave comes in at 10. Another one of these young players, not quite living up to expectations. He doesn't have the same excuse or the same reason as Garrett Wilson. He doesn't have the same reason even as Jalen Waddle. The expectations were very high for Chris Olave, and he's been okay, but he hasn't had that real breakthrough year like many expected, including myself. I think I had him as high as wide receiver 4 in my rankings at one point, and I've had to kind of go back on that a little bit. I still like the player, but I am starting to question if he can be one of those elite guys or if he's more in the T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk value range.
Okay.
You're still there on him?
I think so. I'm a little torn, but yeah, I think so.
I don't know if we want to get into this conversation right now because the wide receiver 11 is Jordan Addison. Now, we know how you feel about him.
I don't love him.
Yeah, he might be your rookie wide receiver 11 for all we know. But according to DLF ADP, he's the wide receiver 11. Devontae Smith, wide receiver 12. Matt, I already know you're taking Jordan Addison off this list. So if you're removing Addison, who are you adding into the top 12, the wide receiver 1 range? Some other names that didn't crack wide receiver 1 group. We've got some veterans like DK Metcalf, of course, Cooper Kupp, we already mentioned, Puka Nacua, Ayuk, Higgins, Drake London, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Who's going to take Addison's spot for you?
Yeah, those are good names. It would come down to Metcalf versus Ayuk, and I would pick Ayuk. I adore Ayuk. I mean, he'd probably be 12, but Ayuk versus Devontae Smith and Diggs is in the same neighborhood for me. DK
Metcalf has 0 wide receiver 1 games this season. Jordan Addison also has 0, by the way, which I was surprised to see. Actually, Addison has 1. Metcalf 0. Frustrating year for DK. Matt, when we come back, we will continue talking ADP. We'll look at the top 12 tight ends, and we've had some shakeup there as well.
Folks, I've told you about Prize Picks often, and I've been doing really well with it. I enjoy it quite a bit. I love that you don't have to battle. It's just you versus a number. You don't have to battle a bunch of sharks or a pool of thousands of people and hope you come out on top. And what's pretty cool is if you happen to be into NBA, I mean, with basketball season here, you can pick combo projections across basketball and football from the specials league, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes two or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. So if one guy gets hurt or has a problem, the other one might blow up and you still might win, things like that. So pretty cool. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay play even if one of those players do get injured. For football or basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return for the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily sports platform with an insurance policy for injury. Pretty cool. Prize Picks is super easy to play. I can make my picks and submit it in 60 seconds or less easily. Quick withdrawals, that's really important to me as well. Easy gameplay, enormous selection of players and stat types. I mean, it's why it's the number one daily sports app out there. So they also have Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits. That makes things a lot easier as well. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I mean, that's $3. A free $100 right there. So again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100.
Matt, let's roll through these top 12 tight ends. And I mentioned a shakeup. It starts at the top. Sam Laporta is the Dynasty tight end one. I saw a lot of the one. He's at the top line. I saw a lot of talk about this a couple weeks ago when Laporta was really red hot. Had kind of a couple quieter games over the past couple weeks, but 2 to 3 weeks ago, I kind of felt the push for Laporta to be considered the Dynasty tight end one. And when we completed that ADP, that's where he sat. Do you have a problem with it?
Seems premature, but I don't know who else has a tremendous case. I'm starting to really, this is the wrong way of saying it. I was about to say I'm really souring on Kelce. I just think that's way too harsh, Williamson. This guy's great. I'm sure he'll light up the second half of the season, but seems like he has other interests.
You're one of those, huh? You're one of those.
I mean, is he going to put his body in harm's way year after year going forward for my fantasy team? I don't know that I would if I were in his shoes, especially win the Super Bowl this year and ride off into the sunset with a new friend or, his brother. Or I just don't know how much longer we're going to see the great Travis Kelce.
Well, he's 34 years old. I do think he's had some monster games this season, but he's also had some very disappointing games, honestly, very quiet games. And I feel like we're starting to see signs of, wear and tear, aging, whatever you want to attribute it to. It feels like big picture overall, he's slowing down a little. So I don't have a problem with valuing some of these other guys ahead of him. If you want to have Mark Andrews as your tight end one instead,
Kelce might be number 5 for me.
I could see that. Kelce does sit at he sits at the tight end 2 spot right now, and it's the same conversation we've had with these wide receivers, specifically Tyreek Hill. Same conversation we had with last week with Christian McCaffrey versus all those young running backs. How do you value the old guy who's super, super productive versus the younger guys who are clearly on the way up? And I mean, that's one of the biggest conundrums in Dynasty every single year. We're getting some really strong examples of it this season, and Dynasty managers have to make some decisions. I mean, I don't think you could trade Kelce for Laporta right now. If you could, I would, if I could in my leagues, I would do that. I would trade him for Andrews or Hawkinson.
Yep.
And I would strongly consider trading him for Dalton Kincaid. And those are
Yeah.
Those are our top 5 tight ends right now. Laporta, Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, Kincaid has climbed into that 5 spot. And then it gets a little rocky. You could throw the rest of these guys in a lot of different orders. Kyle Pitts is currently the wide receiver 6. Couple veterans coming up next, Kittle and Goddard. And then this is maybe the most interesting guy on the list right now. Tight end 9 is Trey McBride. We collected this data, or at least we started collecting the data 2 weeks ago. We've seen 2 big games now for McBride the past 2 weeks, and obviously we got Kyler Murray back on the field. If we were re-ranking these right now or recollecting this ADP, or you can even think about December ADP, Matt, where do you expect Trey McBride to fall on this list?
I think this is right.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he was the first tight end drafted, second rounder. I think that Cardinals offense is actually quite good and probably will end up rolling with Kyler Murray going forward.
So you don't think he's too low here? I think he's too low.
That's what I was going to say. McBride versus Pitts for me is interesting. I feel like we're being a little rough on Goddard because he's injured and out of sight, but he's still really good. He
is still really good, but he's also had
production's not great.
Yeah, I mean, again, as we said with Devontae Smith, AJ Brown has clearly taken over that team. I'm putting McBride above Goddard, above Kittle, and I think I'm ready to put him above Kyle Pitts as well.
I say Pitts at 6 is just kind of sitting out like a sore thumb. Like I would much rather pay tight end 9 price for McBride than tight end 6 price for Pitts. You know, like if it was a startup,
right,
pivot, or if it's startup, you could wait a round later or something. That'd be the ideal move for me. I can't imagine paying tight end 6 prices right now for Kyle Pitts.
We've got a big drop off here. Yeah, I know. Patience still.
Yeah.
We've got a big drop off after McBride. Luke Musgrave is the tight end 10. Michael Mayer is the tight end 11, another one of your favorites. And
I'm warming up to him now.
Yeah. Evan Ingram, veteran tight end, is at 12. So we get a total of 4 rookies inside our top 12. And I think that's right. Musgrave and Mayer. Some of these other names that did not crack the tight end 1 range, Kmet, Jake Ferguson, Freiermuth has fallen off, Darren Waller, big time falling off.
Yeah.
I don't know if I think this might be the right 12. I think these are the 12 guys that I value as the top 12 tight ends right now.
Yeah, I kind of like the Njoku too, but I'm having some recency bias because Steelers are playing the Browns and they've been feeding him lately. One little nugget I just want to throw out there and kind of shows my age, but I remember many years ago when I worked for ESPN, we'd had the Fantasy Summit. And there were 11 of us. It was like that. Matthew Berry and those guys. And 11 of us got votes as to what the final ranks were going to be. And I remember this so vividly. There was this huge fight in the room about rookie tight end Eric Ebron. I mean, that's how long ago it was, and he was a super high pick. We should have him really high. And eventually the old folks.
That was 2014, right?
I think so. Yeah. So, I mean, eventually it won out that nope, rookie tight ends don't produce. I think it's now, I don't believe in that at all anymore. We're talking about Laporta and Kincaid and McBride in the second year, Musgrave, Mayer. I think rookie tight ends produce now.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the things that we've seen change over the years. I mean, that honestly, that used to be kind of the narrative with wide receivers as well. I mean, if you've played fantasy as long as us two old guys have, then yeah, exactly. You wait for the third year for those wide receivers to really turn it on, and now we're ready to give up on Quentin Johnston 8 or 9 weeks in.
Good point.
But it's because the NFL's changed, and we're seeing that change at the tight end position as well. So those rookie tight ends have to start producing immediately, or we start doubting them. I mean, even Mayer, who was slow to kind of get started this season, we saw him losing value before recent little surge in production, and now he's back to where he was being valued preseason.
Yeah, I don't think anybody cares if Dalton Kincaid can block a defensive end anymore.
Yeah, really.
Just go get open.
That's going to do it.
Yep.
Yeah. That's going to do it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL, and I'm Ryan, MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.